Her son gave her a guest room, next to the water heater behind the garage. Irene Callahan, ranch widow and former landowner, didn't protest. Grayson, now a billionaire with polished glass walls and a polished wife, called it temporary. By Friday, she'd pulled the deeds, froze his assets, and served him papers on land he never legally owned. She raised him with everything she had. Now she was reclaiming what never stopped being hers. And when he tried to play landlord, the courthouse reminded him who signed the soil. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The tires of the black SUV crunched against the gravel drive as the iron gates of the Callahan estate swung open. Austin's evening light spilled across glass and steel, catching on every sharp corner of Grayson's hilltop mansion. From the passenger seat, Irene Callahan sat upright despite the tremor still working its way through her right hand. The hospital bracelet peeked out from beneath her sleeve, a quiet reminder of how close things had come. The health scare had been minor, the doctor said. Just exhaustion, maybe stress. But Grayson had insisted she stay, for a while. The way he said it made her feel like a polite obligation, not a mother. When the SUV stopped under the portico, the front door opened before she could reach for the handle. Lara stood there in a white blouse and soft gray slacks, perfectly composed, perfectly distant. "Mrs. Callahan," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "you must be tired." "Irene's fine," she answered, her voice steady. She eased out of the car, holding her small suitcase like a shield. The air smelled faintly of eucalyptus and new marble, a cold, clean scent that reminded her of hospitals more than homes. Grayson appeared in the foyer, phone still in hand, talking through Bluetooth. He gave her a one-armed hug without ending the call. "Yeah, just got her here." "Uh-huh. Run the numbers by Monday," he said to the invisible person in his ear. Then finally, "Hey, Mom." "Hey, son." He took her suitcase before she could protest, already leading her inside. The house gleamed, open spaces, sunlight trapped in glass panels, the kind of silence that money buys. Irene's soft leather shoes made no sound on the polished floor. 3 bedrooms lined the east corridor, their doors slightly ajar. She glimpsed white duvets, clean drapes, the kind of emptiness that looked staged. "Those are guest suites?" she asked lightly. "Yeah, but we've got contractors coming tomorrow," Grayson said quickly, steering her past them. "They're redoing the sound system. I figured the guest room near the garage might be quieter." Lara trailed behind them, her perfume cutting through the air like citrus over steel. "It's really just for a few nights," she added. "We don't want you dealing with the noise." Irene nodded, though something cold uncurled inside her chest. They reached the end of a side hallway where the flooring shifted from marble to plain oak. Grayson opened a narrow door. The guest room was little more than a box. No windows, one narrow bed, and a small dresser tucked beside the water heater closet. A folded blanket sat like an afterthought. The hum of the garage door motor pulsed through the wall. A faint smell of oil drifted in. Grayson smiled, oblivious. "Cozy, right? We just redid the master suite so space is tight. But you'll be comfortable here." Irene ran her fingers along the dresser's edge, feeling the faint grit of sawdust that hadn't been wiped clean. "You've done well for yourself," she said softly. "Couldn't have without you," he answered automatically, already checking his phone again. Lara placed a small vase of lilies on the nightstand. "You'll have everything you need. There's a call button for Shiloh if you need tea or anything." Her tone was smooth, rehearsed. "Dinner's at 7. When they left, the door clicked shut too quickly behind them. Irene sat on the bed. The mattress was firm, new, expensive, but it sagged faintly in the middle, as if it had been tested once and forgotten. She looked around the room, the blank walls, the absence of any photo, the faint echo when she exhaled. The woman who had raised her son in a two-room farmhouse now sat surrounded by silence worth millions. She reached for her phone. A text from Rosa blinked at the top of the screen. "How's the castle?" Irene smiled thinly and typed back, "Smaller than it looks." Outside, the sunset painted the skyline in gold and violet, but not a trace of that light touched her new quarters. Somewhere above her, laughter drifted down from the kitchen, Laura's voice, bright and social. Grayson's deeper one followed, punctuated by a champagne pop. Irene folded her hospital bracelet carefully into her purse. Her fingers brushed the worn edges of an old envelope she kept there, a set of land deeds, the last thing her husband had signed before he died. She closed her eyes for a long moment. Then she stood, crossed to the door and tested the handle. It opened easily, no lock. But when she looked down the corridor toward the living room glow, something in her settled. Not defeat, but recognition. They thought she'd come here to rest. They were wrong. She closed the door again, the faintest smile tracing her lips as the garage motor rumbled awake beyond the wall. Steady, mechanical, predictable. Unlike what was coming next. Morning in the Callahan mansion didn't rise, it activated. The house hummed to life with the rhythm of automation, blinds sliding up in unison, lights adjusting themselves to morning warmth, coffee brewed by command. Irene sat at the edge of the long walnut dining table, hands folded around a cup she hadn't poured herself. Steam curled lazily, though the drink had long since cooled. Across the table, Lara moved with choreographed precision, slicing strawberries, arranging them beside artisan croissants on white porcelain. Her tone was bright enough to pass for cheerful. "We had the interior team redo the lower lounge last week," she said, gesturing toward the open glass walls behind her. "Grayson thought the palette was too industrial, so I went softer. Earth tones. It feels warmer, doesn't it, Gray?" Grayson, still in his tailored gym clothes, didn't look up from his tablet. "Yeah, babe. Looks great. House feels like a magazine cover." He finally set the tablet down and reached for a croissant, the gesture casual and entitled, like everything else about him now. "You should have seen it before, Mom," he said through a mouthful. "Lara's got a real eye for detail. The place finally feels finished." Irene smiled faintly. "I remember when a new curtain panel counted as renovation." Lara's lips pressed together politely. "Well, times change." "Yes," Irene said. "They do." For a while, the only sounds were the faint hum of the espresso machine and a cardinal tapping at the glass outside. Irene's gaze drifted toward the massive windows overlooking the backyard. The morning sun spilled across the freshly paved patio, where a new marble fountain gurgled at the center, a three-tiered sculpture of wings unfurling. She recognized the contractor's logo on the side of a parked van. Same developer who'd once appraised her family's ranch before Grayson sold it off. Her hand tightened around the mug. "That's a beautiful fountain," she said. "You must have paid a fortune." Grayson leaned back, stretching. "It was an investment, really. Adds property value." "Oh, I see," Irene said mildly. "The last time you called something an investment, you sold half our ranch." The remark hung in the air like the smell of burnt coffee. Lara's knife clinked softly against the plate. "That was years ago," she said quickly, with a smile too smooth to be sincere. Grayson chuckled, the sound short and sharp. "Mom, you wanted me to succeed. That land gave me my first startup money, remember?" "I remember," Irene replied, eyes still on the fountain. "I remember signing the papers the same day your father's headstone was installed." That silenced him. Lara cleared her throat, her perfectly manicured fingers folding a linen napkin with unnecessary precision. "Well," she said brightly, "the house is a testament to how far we've all come, isn't it?" "Sure," Irene murmured, Just depends which direction you're facing. She reached for her phone, mostly to break the air. A new text lit the screen. Rosa. Still got the 2003 mineral doc if you need it. Irene's pulse steadied. Her thumb hovered for a second, then she typed back. Hold it. Just in case. When she looked up again, Lara was watching her. Not curiously, but cautiously. Everything okay? She asked. Just a friend checking in, Irene said. Grayson stood, pulling on a blazer over his workout shirt. I've got a design meeting downtown. Lara, you can show Mom the garden later, right? Lara nodded, though her smile had gone taut. Of course. He kissed his wife's cheek, glanced briefly at his mother, and was gone. Just like that. The echo of the front door shutting was louder than necessary, like a period at the end of an argument. For a long minute, the only sound was the fountain outside, its water spilling endlessly over itself. Lara began gathering plates, her movements careful, almost clipped. Irene rose too, brushing crumbs from her lap. You've made it beautiful here, she said, voice calm. Lara paused, unsure if it was compliment or indictment. Thank you, she said finally. But Irene was already looking past her, through the glass, where the sunlight bounced off polished stone and new money. Beyond the walls, the Austin Hills stretched wide and unbought, the kind of land that still breathed. Inside, the air smelled of lavender polish and distance. Irene set her cup down with care. Funny thing about fountains, she said softly. They look like they give, but really, they just recycle. Lara blinked, confused. I'm sorry? Nothing. Irene smiled faintly. Just talking to myself. As she turned to leave the table, her phone buzzed again. A single vibration that felt heavier than it should. She didn't need to read it to know what it meant. The past she'd signed away 2 decades ago was still waiting, documented and real, and suddenly, it didn't feel so distant anymore. She slipped the phone back into her sweater pocket, her expression unreadable. The hum of the fountain deepened, almost like a whisper under the running water, steady, relentless, and impossible to ignore. The night after the breakfast conversation stretched out longer than Irene expected. Sleep didn't come easily, not with the faint hum of the garage motor pulsing through her thin walls, or the memory of Grayson's easy laugh when he'd said investment. She rose before dawn. The mansion was silent except for the low, filtered whir of the HVAC system. Outside, Austin's skyline blinked like a constellation made of glass. She stood by the small window in the garage hallway, pressing a hand to the cool frame, watching the early commuter lights trace down the hill. It was beautiful, she admitted to herself, but it wasn't home. Her real home had smelled like mesquite and leather polish, and the mornings had started with her husband, Martin, rattling pans and cursing under his breath at the coffee pot that always leaked. The ranch house had been small, nothing polished about it, but it was honest. Every inch of it had earned its shine through calloused hands. She could still see the front porch if she closed her eyes, the chipped white railing, the tin wind chime Rosa had given her, the dirt road where Grayson learned to drive his father's old pickup. For a second, she almost heard the cattle lowing across the pasture before the memory was broken by the hollow hum of the refrigerator outside her door. Irene sat down at the small desk Lara had thoughtfully placed in her guest space. The surface was empty but for a decorative lamp and a silver-framed photo of Grayson and Lara at a tech gala. Their smiles were perfect. She pushed the photo aside and opened her laptop. The county property records site was slow to load. She typed her own name into the search bar, Irene M. Callahan, more out of idle curiosity than suspicion. She expected nothing. After all, the ranch had been sold years ago. But there it was, parcel ID 114702, Bastrop County. Listed owner, Irene M. Callahan. Status, active. She frowned. It had to be an error. Then another entry appeared below it, linked through a Callahan Development LLC, signed by Grayson L. Callahan, but the title transfer box was empty. No completion stamp. No record of payment. Her pulse ticked higher as she scrolled through the sublinks. 5, 6, then 8 parcels, all referencing joint filings between her old ranch and Grayson's newer business holdings. Her name lingered like a ghost on half the documents. A faint knock interrupted her thoughts. Shiloh, the housekeeper, peeked in. "Sorry, Mrs. Callahan, just checking on laundry service." "Thank you, dear. Leave it by the door." When she was gone, Irene reached for her phone and scrolled to a name she hadn't called in years: Dev Patel, attorney at law. His number was still the same. She hesitated, then hit call. He answered on the second ring, voice low and professional. "Dev Patel." "Dev, it's Irene Callahan." A pause. "Well, I'll be damned. It's been what, 15 years? Long enough for my son to build an empire," she said. "I need you to look at something for me." She explained briefly: the property entries, the missing transfer confirmations, the overlapping LLCs. Dev listened without interruption, only the faint scratch of pen on paper betraying his reaction. When she finished, he exhaled slowly. "You said Bastrop parcels, right? I remember those. If your name's still on the chain, there's leverage. And it's all still active." "Meaning?" "Meaning your son built part of his foundation on assets he doesn't fully own." The words landed with the quiet force of a gavel. Irene looked toward the ceiling, toward the glass floors above her, the perfect home built on shaky ground. "I'll need the full title histories," she said. "Every parcel, every lien." "You'll have them within the day," Dev promised. "And Irene, don't say anything to him yet." "I wasn't planning to." After the call, she sat back, letting the reality settle. It wasn't just about a missing document. It was about ownership, about memory, about respect. Her laptop chimed again. An incoming email from Rosa Hayes. Subject: "For your eyes only." Irene opened it. A row of attached PDFs appeared, their names formal and sterile. Mineral rights, 2003 PDF, Bastrop saw deed, chain.pdf, Callahan v. Callahan et al.pdf. That last one froze her breath. She clicked it open, scrolling through the dense legal text until she found a familiar line in Rosa's old handwriting scanned into the margin. "Don't ever let them take what's still yours." Her chest tightened, but not with sadness. Something steadier, colder, sharper. Above her, footsteps crossed the marble floor. She could hear Lara's heels clicking toward the kitchen, Grayson's voice following, light and careless. Irene minimized her screen, tucking away the documents. She didn't want them to know. Not yet. The fountain outside gurgled, the sound faint but constant, echoing up through the vents like a whisper from the land itself. For the first time since she'd arrived, Irene smiled to herself. Not the polite, distant smile she'd worn for Lara, but something private, resolute. The house wasn't the only thing built on her name, and this time she intended to collect what was owed. Late afternoon sunlight fractured through the glass walls of the mansion, streaking the marble floors in gold. Irene stood at the top of the staircase, her hand resting on the cool metal rail. She'd climbed up quietly, no announcement, no request. Just the steady, deliberate steps of someone reclaiming her balance. Grayson and Lara's voices floated from the kitchen below, filtered through laughter and the faint clatter of wine glasses. Irene wasn't listening for them. Not really. She just wanted to breathe somewhere that didn't hum like a garage. But as she crossed the landing, she heard her own name. "She's acting like this is her house," Lara said, the words light but edged. "She was upstairs again this morning, walking around the office." Grayson's tone followed, careless and amused. "Technically, Part of it still is. Silence. Then Lara's incredulous whisper. What do you mean? A pause. The faint pop of a cork. A shrug she could almost hear. A couple of parcels are still in her name. Some paperwork thing from years back. Patel's probably fixed it by now. Then fix it again, Lara said sharply. She makes the staff nervous. Shiloh told me she's been up all night on her laptop. Irene's hand tightened on the railing. Lara's voice dropped lower. Move her suitcase back to the garage room, please. The blue one near the heater. I don't want her wandering around the main floor. Irene stepped back before she was seen, her breath even. Calm. Years of managing men, banks, and contracts had taught her that control wasn't about reaction, it was about timing. She walked down the hallway and stopped by the large window overlooking the backyard. The fountain glistened in the late sun, its endless stream arcing up and falling back into itself. Her reflection hovered ghost-like against the glass. From the kitchen came Grayson's laugh again. She'll be fine, Lara, it's just temporary. You said that 2 weeks ago. A beat. Come on, babe, let's not make it a thing. The conversation dissolved into soft murmurs. Irene didn't need to hear more. She turned, composed, and descended the stairs with the slow grace of someone who'd been underestimated her entire life. Shiloh appeared at the end of the corridor, holding a folded blanket and a polite smile. Mrs. Callahan, Mrs. Bilay, Lara asked me to move my things, Irene finished for her. The young woman froze, caught. Yes, ma'am, just for convenience. Irene met her eyes and offered a kind, weary smile. You're not the one who needs to apologize, dear. She took out her phone as Shiloh retreated. One message, typed with surgical precision. 2. Rosa, they know. Seconds later, 3 dots appeared, then Rosa's reply. Then we move faster. Irene exhaled slowly, the first sign of steel glinting beneath her calm. She opened her contacts and scrolled to Dev Patel's number. He answered immediately this time. I was just finalizing your packet. Good, we'll need more than that, Irene said. They've started asking questions. Dev's tone sharpened. Questions? They know about the parcels, and they're nervous. He went quiet for a moment, then. All right. I'll file an ownership freeze request, quietly. It'll lock the assets until we sort this out. Do it today. Done. You sure you're ready for this, Irene? Once it's in motion? I've been ready for 20 years, she interrupted softly. When she hung up, she noticed her hands weren't trembling. Not even a little. Down the hall, the faint hum of the refrigerator blended with the bubbling of the fountain outside. The house felt smaller now. Not because she was confined to it, but because its walls were closing around those who thought they owned them. Irene opened her planner and wrote a single line in neat, steady handwriting. Bastrop County Records. Appointment. She circled the date twice. Then she folded the planner shut, placed it neatly beside her purse and looked toward the closed kitchen door. Inside, she could hear Lara's voice again, laughing, bright, oblivious. Irene smiled faintly, the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes. Enjoy your dinner, sweetheart, she murmured under her breath. You're dining on borrowed ground. She turned and walked back toward the guest wing, her heels clicking softly across the polished floor, each step an echo of intention. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, low, patient, and promising. The next morning broke with the uneasy stillness that comes before a storm. The air was dense, humming faintly against the mansion's glass walls, as if the house itself sensed what was about to happen. Irene was already awake. She'd been up since 4, the documents printed, sealed, and resting inside a cream envelope she'd slipped into her purse. Each page bore her full name in bold at the top, Irene M. Callahan, owner of record. By 7, she sat at the breakfast bar, hands folded neatly, the envelope waiting beside her coffee. The smell of cinnamon and espresso filled the kitchen. Shiloh moved quietly around the counters, setting out fruit and fresh pastries. Lara breezed in first, phone in hand, her voice all sugar and static. Yes, confirm the tasting menu for Saturday. Right, the vineyard one. She stopped short when she saw Irene sitting at the island. Oh, good morning, she said, too brightly. Morning, Irene replied. Her tone was steady, almost pleasant. Grayson followed a moment later, jacket slung over one shoulder, Bluetooth in his ear. Yeah, I'll sign off once legal clears it. He caught sight of his mother and clicked off the call. You're up early. Old habits. He nodded, reaching for the French press. Sleep okay last night? I did fine, she said, then added, though the house was restless. Lara frowned faintly, not understanding. Irene's eyes never left her son. Before you head out, she said, sliding the envelope across the marble. I'd like you both to read this. Grayson blinked at it. Mom, what's this? Another deed thing? In a way, Irene said. Go on. He tore it open casually, then slowed as his eyes scanned the first line. His posture shifted, the easy confidence draining by inches. Lara watched, confused. What is it? Grayson didn't answer. He just kept reading. Irene spoke softly, like someone dictating minutes from a meeting. That's a formal notice of eviction from the land title, 60-day deadline, filed this morning. Lara laughed once, incredulous. Eviction? You can't evict us. This is our home. No, Irene said, her voice so calm it felt like the edge of a blade. It's my land. The house sits on a parcel still registered to me. I'm revoking the ground lease. For a moment, no one breathed. Then Grayson shoved the papers aside. Mom, this is ridiculous. Some clerical mix-up. Dev must have... Dev works for me, she interrupted. Not for you. Lara's mouth opened, then shut. You wouldn't... I already did. She reached for her coffee, took a small sip, then set it down with careful precision. You said you needed space. 60 days should be enough. Grayson's color had drained to a sickly gray. You can't just... You don't even live here. I didn't choose that, Irene said, but I can choose this. Lara glanced toward the hallway, as if the sheer size of the mansion might defend her. We've invested millions here. Permits, landscaping, solar expansion. All improvements made on property that isn't legally yours, Irene said. You built over my foundation without finishing the transfer. You called it leverage once, remember? Shiloh had stopped pretending to clean. From her position by the counter, she quietly angled her phone, its camera lens catching the scene in perfect, trembling silence. Grayson slammed his hand on the counter. This is insane. Irene didn't flinch. No, son, this is overdue. The silence afterward was long and tight. The hum of the refrigerator filled it, a low, mechanical pulse that made every second stretch. Lara spoke first, voice brittle. You're doing this out of spite. Irene turned to her, the faintest hint of a smile curling at one corner. No, dear, I'm doing it out of ownership. From the living room, thunder rumbled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, a single roll that trembled in the glass. Grayson stared at her like he was seeing a stranger. You're really going to destroy everything we've built? You built it on what was mine, Irene said. So technically, I'm just reclaiming construction costs. Her phone buzzed once. She picked it up without breaking eye contact. The message was from Dev. Filed. Recorded. Effective immediately. She set the phone down, her expression serene. You might want to call your lawyer, she said gently. Lara sank into a stool, her manicured fingers trembling against the counter. You'll regret this. I doubt it, Irene said, standing. She gathered her purse, the empty coffee cup, and the faint satisfaction of completion. You gave me a guest room by the garage. Consider this me returning the favor. She walked out without another word, the echo of her footsteps swallowed by thunder. Behind her, Grayson tore through the pages of the eviction notice, scanning for loopholes. None appeared. Shiloh stopped recording, her breath unsteady. The video ended just as Irene's voice, calm and precise, lingered on the air. This house sits on land I still own. Not for long. By 9 the next morning, the storm had cleared, but the air still felt charged, like something unfinished had been left hanging between lightning and strike. Downtown Austin pulsed with midweek noise, traffic, coffee carts, and the soft hum of high-rise ambition. Inside the sleek glass-walled offices of Patel and Morgan Legal, Grayson Callahan was unraveling. He burst through the front door, sunglasses still on, voice already raised. "Where's Dev Patel?" The receptionist looked startled. "He's in a meeting?" "Not anymore," Grayson snapped, and pushed open the frosted door at the end of the hall. Dev looked up from a file, calm as a surgeon mid-procedure. "Mr. Callahan," he said, setting his pen down deliberately, "you don't have an appointment." "I don't need one. What the hell did my mother make you file?" Dev's gaze didn't waver. The ownership freeze, the eviction notice, and the mineral rights protection order, all perfectly legal. Grayson slammed both palms on the desk. "I'll buy it out. Whatever she's paying you, I'll double it. Hell, I'll triple it. Just undo it." Dev leaned back slowly. "You can't buy out integrity, Grayson, and even if you could, I don't sell mine. You're ruining me." "No," Dev said evenly. "You did that when you used her property as collateral." For a moment, the only sound was Grayson's ragged breathing and the steady tick of Dev's antique clock. Then Dev reached for a folder. "You should know something. The mineral rights under the Bastrop parcels? Still in her name. Meaning every development your firm's planned for the southeast expansion is about to be frozen too." Grayson blinked, stunned. "That's impossible." Dev didn't blink. "Rosa Hayes verified it this morning. The records go back to 2003. Grayson's composure cracked like glass under pressure. "She can't do this. She's 70 years old. She doesn't understand how this works anymore." Dev's voice softened, almost pitying. "I think she understands better than anyone." Grayson turned without another word, jaw tight, and stormed out. The door slammed behind him, rattling the glass. At the county office later that day, Irene stood in a quiet queue of contractors and landowners. Her posture was straight, her tone gentle when she finally approached the clerk. "I'd like to release certain easements on my Bastrop parcels," she said, sliding a folder across the counter. The clerk frowned. "You mean restrict them?" "No," Irene said, smiling faintly. "Release. Effective immediately." The clerk hesitated, reading the file, then typed. A moment later, she nodded. "Done. Those easements are dissolved." "Which means," Irene continued pleasantly, "no one can legally build or expand across that acreage without my reauthorization." The clerk looked up, a flicker of admiration crossing her expression. "You've done your homework." "I've had years to prepare." When she left the office, sunlight broke through the clouds, scattering across the courthouse steps. Irene paused at the top, the wind tugging lightly at her hair. Somewhere in the distance, she imagined Grayson's glass empire trembling just a little at its base. That evening, Lara set the dining table like nothing had happened. Crystal stemware, linen napkins, a bottle of wine already breathing. "I thought we could have a calm dinner," Lara said when Irene entered, her tone sweet but brittle. "Start over." Irene sat quietly, folding her napkin on her lap. The steak was perfectly seared, the salad fresh and bright, but the air around the table felt like polished glass, smooth, fragile, ready to crack. "I just think this has all gotten out of hand," Lara said, forcing a laugh. It's a misunderstanding. Family shouldn't fight over paper. Irene cut a piece of steak, lifted her fork, and said nothing. Grayson's been under pressure. He didn't mean, well, he never meant to disrespect you, Lara continued, the smile starting to slip. You know how men are when they feel threatened. Still, Irene said nothing. Finally, Lara set her fork down hard. You don't have to punish us. You have everything. Irene looked up then, calm as still water. If I had everything, dear, I wouldn't still be sitting by your garage. The silence that followed was colder than any argument. Lara stared, speechless, as Irene rose from the table, folded her napkin neatly, and left her plate untouched. Upstairs, Irene stood at the threshold of the second-floor guest suite, the one with the wide windows and the view of the city. She opened the closet, set her small suitcase inside, and began to unpack her clothes. For the first time since arriving, she wasn't careful about noise. The zipper rasped, hangers clicked, drawers opened and shut. Below, she heard Lara's voice rise sharply, Grayson's lower tone trying and failing to steady it. Irene smiled faintly, slipping her folded planner onto the nightstand beside her phone. A new message blinked from Rosa. Mineral docs confirmed. They can't touch a thing. Irene typed back. Good. Let's see how they behave when the ground stops moving for them. She walked to the window. The city spread below her like a board she'd finally learned to play. The mansion lights flickered briefly in the distance as the evening wind picked up, a quiet tremor of systems resetting. By the end of the week, the Callahan name was back in the courthouse, right where it had first been built. Austin's downtown district court gleamed with the polished confidence of modern justice, glass panels, stainless steel accents, and echoes that seemed to multiply inside the high-ceilinged atrium. Irene Callahan walked through it with the quiet authority of someone who'd spent her life signing checks men thought they controlled. Her silver hair was pinned back neatly, her steps steady. Across the marble floor, Grayson stood flanked by his attorneys, his expression brittle behind his designer glasses. Lara stood at his side, wrapped in black cashmere, eyes hollow but defiant. They looked like a couple arriving for a press conference rather than a hearing. When the clerk called the case, Callahan versus Callahan et al., a low murmur rippled through the room. Grayson's lead counsel, a man in a $1,000 suit and an empty conscience, stood first. Your Honor, he began, my clients are victims of fraud. Mrs. Callahan's sudden claim to ownership stems from outdated documents, selectively interpreted to disrupt valid transfers of title. This is a family dispute, nothing more. Across the aisle, Dev Patel didn't move. He waited until the attorney finished, then rose calmly. Outdated, perhaps, but not revoked, and not selective. He handed a slim, leather-bound binder to the clerk. The judge flipped through it, his brow lifting as he read. Dev's tone remained measured. This is the full chain of title for the Bastrop parcels, the mineral rights, and the ground lease for the Callahan residence. Every document is authenticated, notarized, and cross-verified with county records, including the 2003 mineral rights transfer, never revoked, never reassigned. Grayson's jaw tightened. That's irrelevant, he snapped. The intent was always— The law doesn't rule on intent, Dev interrupted, his voice razor-sharp. It rules on paper. And the paper says this land is hers. The judge looked up from the binder. Mr. Callahan, your filings to block the eviction are denied. The documentation is clear. Until or unless Mrs. Callahan transfers ownership, she retains full control. Lara whispered something to Grayson, urgent, pleading. But he shook his head and sank back into his chair. The gavel struck once. Motion to block is denied. It echoed like thunder in Irene's chest. Lara turned toward her, voice rising. This is cruel. You're taking everything from your own son, from your family. Irene met her gaze, her tone soft but unyielding. Cruel, she said, is giving your mother a mattress and calling it kindness. Lara's face went pale. The courtroom went still, the hum of fluorescent lights the only sound for a long beat. Dev closed his binder with a quiet finality, offering Irene a small nod. As they stepped out into the hallway, flashes from local reporters flickered through the glass. Rumor of the billionaire's son evicted by his mother, already spreading. Grayson brushed past them without a word, Lara trailing behind, sunglasses hiding her tears. Outside, the Texas sky had turned an honest blue again. Irene breathed it in deeply, the air cleaner than anything in that mansion had ever felt. Dev stood beside her. You did well in there. I did what was overdue. He smiled faintly. There's something else. Shiloh sent over a video file this morning. You should see it. He handed her his phone. Irene pressed play. The screen showed the footage Shiloh had recorded in the kitchen. The envelope, the confrontation, Lara's disdain, Grayson's outburst. It ended with Irene's voice, calm and resolute. This house sits on land I still own. Not for long. The hallway lights flickered faintly as the video ended. Irene stared at the blank screen for a moment, her reflection faintly visible on its surface. Will it help? She asked. It will do more than help, Dev said. It'll end any doubt about who's been honest in this story. Irene handed the phone back, her expression unreadable. Then let's make sure everyone sees it, quietly. Dev nodded once, understanding her entirely. As they stepped out into the parking lot, the breeze lifted the hem of Irene's blazer, carrying the faint scent of rain and red earth. For the first time in months, she didn't feel like a guest in anyone's house. She turned her face toward the horizon, where the city skyline shimmered against the light. The fight wasn't over, but the ground beneath it finally belonged to her. The article went live on a Wednesday. No names, no photos, just the title. The Mother in the Guest Room. The byline belonged to a young reporter from the Austin Herald, who'd reached out through Dev Patel's office, asking for context. Irene hadn't planned to speak. She'd spent a lifetime keeping her family's business behind closed doors. But something in the reporter's voice, steady, curious, unthreatening, made her reconsider. So she'd agreed to a single interview. Anonymous. No identifiers. Just facts. They met in a small cafe off Congress Avenue, far from glass towers and gated drives. Irene wore a plain cardigan, her hair loose for once, her posture quiet but sure. The reporter set down a recorder between them and said softly, "Tell me what happened." Irene stirred her coffee once, twice, and began. I built a life for my son on land my husband and I worked ourselves. He sold that land to build something bigger. And when I had nowhere else to go, he gave me a guest room by his garage. She stopped there. No bitterness in her tone, just the weight of truth spoken aloud for the first time. The reporter blinked, almost forgetting to write. Why tell the story now? Because some foundations aren't made of concrete, Irene said. They're made of memory, and memory deserves a record. When the piece was published 3 days later, the internet did what it always does. It connected the dots. Readers noticed the unnamed tech mogul in Austin with a glass mansion on a hill. They matched the description to recent court filings. They pulled public records, scrolled through business registries, and filled in every missing name. By Friday, Chaka Guest Room Son was trending across 3 platforms. Grayson Callahan's company homepage went offline for maintenance. Lara's Instagram, once a daily showcase of wealth and curated philanthropy, disappeared overnight. Before it vanished, her last post had been a quote about gratitude and family, which the comments section shredded within hours. Turns out, kindness doesn't come with an elevator, one user wrote. Imagine evicting your own mother from a mansion built on her land, said another. Grayson tried to fight back. A glossy PR statement hit the wires the next morning. Family disputes are private matters. Mischaracterizations of our internal affairs will be addressed legally. But screenshots live forever, and silence speaks louder than spin. By Sunday, his investors were calling for stability talks. Stock in his development firm dipped 7%. A rival company issued a statement of ethical leadership in real estate. The vultures were circling, but Irene didn't care about that. She hadn't set out to ruin him. She'd just set out to be seen. That same afternoon, she drove east toward Bastrop, the low hills opening like memory itself. Rosa sat in the passenger seat, her reading glasses perched on the tip of her nose, flipping through a folder. Land Conservancy's already interested, Rosa said. They want to turn the lower acreage into a public trust, keep it off the market forever. Irene smiled faintly, eyes on the road. Martin would have liked that. You sure you're ready to let it go? I'm not letting go, Irene said. I'm passing it forward. They turned down the old ranch road, the one that still carried the faint outline of wagon ruts under the asphalt. The gate stood where it always had, though the paint had long since peeled. Irene pulled over, stepped out, and pressed her palm to the weathered wood. The wind moved through the grass, the same way it had when she was 20 and the world was smaller but steadier. Rosa climbed out beside her. They'll name it after you, you know. I hope they don't, Irene said. Names fade, but land remembers. They stood in silence for a while, the sun dipping low, casting the fields in bronze light. From the ridge, the city looked distant, almost unreal, a shimmer of glass and ego that no longer owned her. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A message from Dev. Article, hit national. You should read the comments. She didn't. She just typed back. Let it live its own life. When she turned back toward the car, Rosa's expression had softened. You know, he's probably reading them right now. I hope he is, Irene said quietly. Every word he never let me say. As they drove off, the sky burned orange behind them. The radio played low, an old country station Irene used to hum along to while tallying ranch accounts. Her eyes caught her reflection in the window. Calm, lined, resolute. For the first time, she didn't see Grayson Callahan's mother. She saw Irene Callahan, landowner, survivor, and witness. The email came at 2:14 a.m. Dev Patel was still at his desk, the glow of his monitor painting the walls of his Austin office in pale blue light. The subject line read simply, "For justice, please keep me anonymous." Attached was a single file, a time-stamped video clip, unlisted and encrypted. He clicked play. The footage began with the kitchen's gleaming marble island, its surface reflecting morning sunlight. Irene's voice was calm, steady. Lara's was clipped, almost rehearsed. Then Grayson's, sharp, impatient. Dev leaned forward as the lens caught what the audio missed. The folded chair shoved aside in the hallway, the sneer that passed between husband and wife when Irene wasn't looking. Lara's voice, clear. She's acting like this is her house. Grayson's low reply followed. Technically, part of it still is. For now. She's a liability. Dev paused the video. The timestamp placed it 2 days before the eviction notice. The evidence wasn't just damning, it was corrosive. It cut through every press statement, every lawyer-crafted denial. He picked up his phone and called Irene. She answered after one ring, her voice awake, measured. I assume it's important if you're calling at this hour. You need to come in tomorrow, he said. Someone just sent me a gift. By noon, the courtroom buzzed again. The Callahan case had become a quiet obsession for reporters and legal pundits alike. A billionaire family fracturing in public. Old money, new empire, moral collapse. Dev stepped forward, laptop in hand. Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like to enter new digital evidence into the record. Anonymous submission, but verified by metadata. The judge, a patient man with more years than tolerance for spectacle, gave a small nod. Proceed. The lights dimmed slightly as Dev queued up the footage. The courtroom fell silent. The video began with that ordinary breakfast. Irene seated, polite. Grayson distracted. Lara's tone frosted in contempt. Then the hallway snippet. The cruel remark. The laughter. The complete absence of humanity in two people so obsessed with image. When the recording ended, the silence was absolute. The judge looked to Grayson. Is that your voice? Grayson swallowed. It's been edited. Taken out of context. Dev's tone was cutting but controlled. Metadata says otherwise. No splices, no time jumps. One continuous recording, captured inside your residence. Lara looked ready to faint. You can't record private. The judge raised a hand. Mrs. Callahan, the issue here is ownership and intent, not etiquette. And what I see is intent to deceive. Grayson's counsel tried to recover, but the judge had already turned to Irene. Mrs. Callahan, you've provided chain of title, mineral rights documentation, and now, evidence of willful concealment. I see no basis to deny you full legal control over your holdings, effective immediately. The gavel struck once. A single, clean sound. Like a door closing behind an old life. Outside, the courthouse steps buzzed with reporters again, but Irene didn't stop this time. Rosa was waiting near the curb, eyes red, tissue in hand. They really thought you forgot how to fight, she said, laughing through tears. I did forget, Irene said softly, until they reminded me. They stood together in the spring light, the courthouse shadows stretching long behind them. A woman who'd once been tucked into a windowless room now stood at the center of her own storm, unshaken. Rosa squeezed her hand. So what happens now? Irene looked out toward the horizon. Now, I finish it properly. Later that evening, Dev called again. You'll want to hear this, he said. The judge has set a final hearing, wants you to make a personal statement on record before closure. Irene was silent for a long moment. He wants me to speak? Yes. He says it's unusual, but warranted. He called it a matter of civic interest. A faint smile crept into her voice. Then I suppose it's time my voice was on the record too. As she hung up, the night outside her window was thick and electric. The mansion below her sat quiet, lights off, its perfect glass walls reflecting nothing. Irene stood at the window, the court's decision still echoing through her chest, not as triumph, but as balance finally restored. Her phone buzzed again, an unknown number this time. One message. It's Shiloh. I thought you'd need the truth. Thank you for standing up for it. Irene's reply came quickly. Truth has its own way of standing. She turned off the phone, drew the curtains, and let herself breathe. Tomorrow she would stand before the court one last time. Not as a plaintiff, not as a victim, but as the woman whose name had always been written beneath it all. The courtroom was colder than Irene remembered. Maybe it was the air conditioning, or maybe it was the kind of chill that came from endings. She sat quietly at the plaintiff's table, her hands folded on the wood polished smooth by years of conflict and compromise. A Bible rested near the clerk's elbow. Reporters lined the back wall like shadows pretending not to listen. Grayson sat across from her, jaw locked, eyes hollow. Lara kept her gaze fixed on the table. The glossy sheen of her designer composure had dulled. She looked like someone who'd been forced to see herself under fluorescent truth. When the judge entered, the murmur dropped to silence. Mrs. Irene Callahan, he said, looking directly at her. You may approach the stand. The court invited your statement before final ruling. Irene rose, every movement deliberate. She didn't carry notes. She didn't need them. Her heels clicked once, twice against the tile as she made her way to the stand. When she sat, she folded her hands again, the same way she had at that breakfast table weeks ago. "Mrs. Callahan," the judge said gently, "you have the floor." She nodded. Her voice, when it came, was soft but steady, carrying through the courtroom without strain. "I'm not here to win anything," she began. "That part's already been decided. By the law, by time, by choices made years ago. I'm here because I want the truth to live on paper as clearly as it once lived in our lives." A pause. Even the court reporter slowed her typing. "When my husband, Martin Callahan, died, we had 53 head of cattle and a mortgage that laughed at us every month. My son was 23. Bright, restless, said he wanted to build something that would outlast fences. We sold every steer we owned to give him his first seed money." Her eyes flicked toward Grayson. He didn't meet them. "I told myself it was worth it," Irene continued, "that someday, when he made it big, he'd remember that every brick he laid sat on the back of something once alive. Something we built together." She drew in a slow breath. "I was wrong. Success has a way of erasing the handwriting on the wall, the small, uncredited signatures of those who built it first." Her voice didn't tremble. It didn't need to. The weight of quiet conviction did what anger never could. "When my husband was dying," she said softly, "he told me, 'Don't ever let them rewrite you, Irene. Not your story, not your worth.' He said if anyone tried, I was to make sure the truth stayed somewhere permanent, in ink, in stone, or in land." A ripple passed through the room, not noise, but breath held collectively. She smiled faintly, not at the judge, not at the jury, but at the memory of that voice, steady and weathered. "So I did what he asked. I kept our name where it started, under the soil. I just never imagined I'd have to defend it from our own blood." The judge's expression softened. The reporters stopped pretending to type quietly. "Your Honor," Irina finished, her tone calm but final, "I don't ask for sympathy. I ask for record. That's all." She folded her hands once more. "So when someone reads these filings 20 years from now, they'll know what really happened here. Not the gossip, not the spin. Just the truth." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was reverent. The judge nodded slowly. "Mrs. Callahan," he said, "the court thanks you for your candor." He turned a page on his bench, adjusted his glasses, and spoke the words Irene already knew were coming. "This court upholds the eviction order and the plaintiff's full ownership of the contested property and associated assets." The gavel fell. It didn't echo like thunder this time. It landed like the end of a long sentence finally given its period. Across the aisle, Lara covered her face. Grayson sat frozen, eyes forward, the color drained from him. He didn't look at his mother. Not once. Irene stood slowly, smoothing her jacket. She turned toward Dev, who gave a single nod of respect. Rosa, seated in the gallery, wiped at her eyes. As Irene stepped out of the courtroom, the corridor lights seemed brighter than before. She paused by the glass doors, watching her reflection blur in the morning sun. It wasn't triumph she felt. It was release, a burden shifting back into the hands that had earned it. Behind her, Grayson's voice finally broke the silence, faint and hoarse. "Mom." She turned halfway, her expression unreadable. "Yes, son?" But he had no words left. She waited one beat longer, then nodded once, as though acknowledging the ghost of something that used to matter. "Goodbye, Grayson," she said quietly, and walked out into the light. The judgment came down in print before it came down in flesh. A white envelope with the county seal arrived by courier. Official, unemotional, devastating. Order of eviction, 30 days. Grayson read it 3 times, as if the ink might change under the weight of disbelief. Lara stood in the kitchen, barefoot, clutching a mug she hadn't sipped from. The morning light pouring through the glass walls seemed harsher now, no longer flattering, but exposing. "She can't really make us leave," Lara whispered, though her voice betrayed the tremor of someone who already knew the answer. Grayson dropped the papers on the counter. "She can. She did." The words felt foreign in his mouth. He looked around the mansion, at the stone he'd handpicked, the sleek lines, the infinity pool reflecting the sky. Every inch screamed success. Every inch sat on land he no longer owned. He walked outside, down the steps to the manicured lawn. The fountain still burbled faintly, that eternal loop of water over marble, but now it sounded hollow, mocking. From this angle, the city skyline shimmered through a thin morning haze, his empire just out of reach. 30 days. That same afternoon, Irene sat in Dev's office, a cup of peppermint tea untouched beside a neat stack of documents. "We've filed the re-entry block," Dev said, scanning the final page. "No Callahan Development subsidiary can legally operate or purchase land within the original parcels without your approval." "Good," Irene said simply. He glanced at her, curious. "You don't seem angry." "I was," she said. "For a long time. Now I'm just finished." She signed the final page in precise strokes, her hand steady. Dev leaned back. "This will cut him out of everything tied to the original holdings. It's the cleanest end you could ask for." "I never wanted it messy," Irene said. "Just permanent." By week's end, the mansion hit the market, officially listed as a motivated sale. The listing agent's glossy photos couldn't hide the emptiness. The online comments were brutal. "Poetic justice in glass and steel." One headline read. Investors whispered about Grayson's downfall, but no one said it out loud. He'd become radioactive, too high profile to hire, too tainted to trust. Lara started packing early, her designer clothes folded with trembling precision. "Maybe we can move to Denver," she murmured one evening, half to herself. "Start clean." Grayson didn't answer. He was sitting in the dark of his office, staring at an empty liquor glass, phone in hand. Her number, his mother's, still sat in his contacts. He hovered over it for a long time before pressing call. The automated voice came first. "This number is no longer in service." Then the silence that followed, a void even larger than the house itself. He set the phone down slowly, like it was something fragile he'd already broken. 2 weeks later, the top slope of the hill, prime land overlooking the Austin skyline, changed hands. A rival firm purchased it for twice its market value. The buyer's agent had never met Irene, but the deal closed within 48 hours. When Dev called to confirm, Irene simply said, "Let them build whatever they like up there. At least they'll pay their dues." He laughed softly. "You really are done with him." She smiled faintly. "I'm done chasing peace that doesn't want to be found." Outside Dev's window, Austin shimmered in late afternoon light. The same city that had once chewed up small dreamers like her husband and spat out empires like her sons. Irene rose, thanked Dev, and stepped out into the bright air. The courthouse across the street gleamed. The storm, at long last, had cleared. At Rosa's office, the smell of paper and ink replaced the sterile scent of marble Irene had lived with for too long. Shiloh sat at a desk near the front, her dark hair pulled into a braid, filing deed transfers with quiet efficiency. Rosa leaned against the doorway, grinning. "Told you she was sharp." "She's better than sharp," Irene said. "She remembers." Shiloh looked up, shy but proud. "Feels good, Mrs. Callahan, working with names that mean something." Irene's smile reached her eyes this time. "Keep it that way. Paper tells stories people forget to speak." Rosa snorted. "You should put that on the office wall." "Maybe I already did," Irene said, slipping a folded check onto Rosa's desk. "For the land trust filing fees, let's get it finalized." Rosa looked at her friend. at the quiet power in her shoulders, the hard-won calm, and blinked back tears. "You really did it, Irene." "No," Irene said softly. "I just finally stopped apologizing for doing it." That night, the mansion stood dark and half-empty, the realtor's lockbox glinting at the gate. Inside, boxes were stacked in the foyer. Lara sat among them, scrolling through listings in silence. Grayson stood by the window, looking down at the city, the one he used to own from every angle. Somewhere out there, his mother's name was on every piece of paper that mattered. The wind carried the faint sound of a ranch bell from the east, a sound he hadn't heard in decades. It wasn't a warning, it was remembrance. And for the first time, he wondered what his father had told her that night. The promise she'd kept long after he'd forgotten. The notary's pen clicked twice. Sharp, final. And Irene Callahan signed her name one last time across the bottom of a document that would outlive her. The office was small, lined with books instead of glass walls, the air faintly scented with paper and lemon polish. Dev sat across from her, watching with quiet satisfaction as she slid the finished page into the manila folder marked Estate Directive. Final revision. "That's it," he said softly. "It's done." Irene leaned back, the faintest smile touching her mouth. "I always thought legacy was something people bragged about while they were still alive," she said. "Turns out it's something you build after you stop caring what it looks like." Dev chuckled. "And this," he tapped the folder, "is something worth building." On the first page, in clean legal prose, it named the Bastrop Housing Initiative as her primary heir, a nonprofit dedicated to affordable senior housing in rural Texas. Her personal assets, modest by billionaire standards but significant in reality, were earmarked for the trust. Under executor, two names stood side by side: Tessa Reed, longtime accountant and friend of Rosa, and Shiloh Moore, former housekeeper, current registrar assistant. Irene had insisted on that. "Every hand that helped me build or hold something honest," she'd told Dev. "That's who gets to carry the rest." Dev sealed the folder, stamped it, and handed her a copy. "I'll file this with the court today. Once it's processed, your estate is fully secure." "Then it's not really mine anymore," she said, though her tone held no regret. Outside, the spring wind carried the scent of cedar and rain. Irene walked the short distance from Dev's office to Rosa's registry, her steps slow but steady. Inside, Shiloh was at her desk again, a stack of deeds beside her, humming faintly to a country tune from the small radio near the window. "Morning, Mrs. Callahan," she said, smiling. "Morning, Shiloh. You're early." "Habit," Shiloh said. "Feels good to get the paperwork right before anyone else touches it." Irene smiled, a knowing, proud smile. "That's how it starts. You take care of the paper, and the truth takes care of itself." She set down a thick envelope. "This is the deed transfer, the trust lands. You and Rosa will file it today." Shiloh glanced at the label. "So it's really happening? The Conservancy?" "It's happening," Irene said. "A third of the acreage, converted to public use. Trails, community housing, a co-op garden." Rosa entered from the back, coffee in hand. "And every inch of it under your signature." "Not mine anymore," Irene said. "Ours." Rosa looked at her for a long moment, her usual grin softening into something tender. "You know, you could have just left it to family." "I did," Irene said. "Just not the ones who share my blood." That evening, as the sun set behind Austin's skyline, Irene sat by the window of her modest downtown apartment. Her phone buzzed once on the table. "Lara, you've made your point." Irene stared at the words for a moment, her reflection caught faintly in the glass. The city lights below shimmered like a constellation of hollow crowns. She typed back slowly. "That was never the point." She hesitated, then added, "But I'm glad it hurt." She hit send, then turned the phone face down and poured herself a cup of tea. Hours later, Dev sent a text of his own. Filed and finalized. "You're officially done, Irene." She smiled at the phrasing. Done. Such a simple word for something that had taken a lifetime. She responded, "Thank you, Dev. Make sure Rosa gets copies. And Shiloh, too." The city outside was quiet, rain beginning to fall in soft, deliberate drops. Irene watched it trace down the window, each rivulet catching a glint of streetlight before disappearing into the dark. Her thoughts wandered to Martin. The smell of hay, the sound of cattle, the way he used to hum while checking fences. She imagined his voice beside her now, low and sure. "You did right by it, Irene. You did right by us." She closed her eyes, letting the sound of rain fill the silence. The next morning, the Austin Herald ran a quiet, inside-page piece. Bastrop land donated for senior housing initiative. Anonymous benefactor signs, deed to conservancy. Rosa clipped the article and pinned it to the wall above her desk. Shiloh smiled every time she passed it, straightening the edges with her fingertips. None of them needed the byline. They knew exactly whose hand had signed the future into existence. The day the story broke, Austin woke to headlines that no one saw coming. City secures historic water lease, 99-year agreement signed by Callahan family heir. The article ran above the fold in the Austin Chronicle, right beside a photo of the shimmering basin east of Bastrop. The same reservoir Grayson had once used to power his luxury development project. The subheader was merciless. Lease valued at $1 per year, ensuring permanent municipal access. Irene Callahan's name wasn't mentioned directly, only a cryptic line noting the deal was executed under M. Callahan Holdings, LLC. Dev Patel, of course, knew. He'd drafted the paperwork himself. "It's poetic," he'd told her when she signed the agreement. "You're giving life to the land they tried to drain." "Water remembers," Irene had replied, a soft smile curving her lips. "It keeps its own ledger." At Rosa's office, the news had people talking. The registry staff huddled around a monitor, coffee cups half finished, staring at the headline. Shiloh burst out laughing first, clapping a hand over her mouth. "She leased it to the city? For $1?" Rosa grinned like a fox. $1. And 50 years of headaches for anyone who thought they could build over her again. She grabbed the bottle of bourbon she kept for occasions and poured 2 uneven glasses. "To the woman who held the deed. And the line," she said, raising her glass high. Shiloh lifted hers in awe, and never once lost her aim. They drank to it. Somewhere, a copy of the paper sat folded neatly on Irene's table beside her morning tea. She'd already read it once and underlined nothing. There was no need. The story spoke for itself. Grayson saw the same headline while standing in line at a downtown coffee shop. His company card had just been declined. Again. And the man behind him was muttering under his breath about the wait. He didn't notice the paper at first, not until the barista pointed at it. "Hey, isn't that your mom's family? Callahan Holdings? Big deal, huh?" Grayson's eyes flicked to the print. M. Callahan Holdings. He froze. The color drained from his face as he realized exactly what those initials stood for. Not Martin. Not some dormant trust. Her. The woman he'd laughed off, dismissed, evicted, had just secured control of the very water rights his developers once leveraged for expansion. Without that access, no one could build in half of eastern Austin without going through her. It wasn't revenge, it was strategy. Decades in the making, sealed with a signature worth less than a cup of coffee. By afternoon, his phone was lighting up with messages from investors and former partners. "We need to talk. The board's convening an emergency meeting. You didn't disclose the lease transfer." By evening, His name was quietly removed from 2 company directories. By week's end, 3 more. Lara didn't say a word when she handed him the envelope. Divorce papers. Clean, efficient, brutal. "I can't spend the rest of my life living in your mother's shadow," she said quietly. He laughed once, a sound that broke halfway through. "She doesn't cast shadows anymore," he said. "She builds them." Lara didn't answer. She just walked out, heels sharp against the marble, leaving him in the hollow mansion that no longer belonged to him. Across town, in Dave's office, Irene sat across from him while he reviewed the latest filings. "So," Dev said, looking up, "the LLC worked. M. Callahan Holdings is officially the owner of record on the foreclosed mansion. The auction cleared last night." Irene stirred her tea. "Good. Make sure the sale transfer stays quiet until the deed records." Dev smirked. "You really think he won't find out?" "Oh, he will," Irene said. "That's the point. Some lessons have to echo." He laughed softly. "You're terrifying, you know that?" "Just thorough," she corrected. She rose, adjusting her jacket, and looked out the office window at the downtown skyline. The same buildings Grayson once claimed as proof of his brilliance now glittered like distant regrets. "Do you want me to prep the restoration plans?" Dev asked. "Not yet," Irene said. "For now, let it sit empty. I like it better when the house can hear itself think." That night, Rosa and Shiloh came over with takeout and cheap wine. The 3 of them sat on Irene's porch, the air thick with spring rain and quiet satisfaction. "You really bought it back?" Rosa said, shaking her head. "The mansion. The whole thing." Irene's smile was slow, measured. "It was never about buying. It was about reclaiming what arrogance mistook for inheritance." Shiloh grinned. "What are you going to do with it?" Irene tilted her head, watching the lightning far off on the horizon. "Something useful. Something kind. Something he wouldn't understand if I drew him a map." They laughed then, low, easy, free. When the rain began, Irene didn't move. She just let it fall against her hands, cold and cleansing. The sound reminded her of the ranch's tin roof, of nights when the storm rolled across open pasture, and she'd felt the land breathe beneath her. She closed her eyes and whispered, "It's all water under my bridge now." Rosa heard and lifted her glass. "To bridges, and to the woman who built them from what was stolen." Irene clinked her glass against hers, "To remembering who owned the water all along." The mansion stood silent on the hill, its glass walls catching the morning sun like shards of apology. Dust floated in thin shafts of light where furniture once sat. Sleek, expensive, soulless. Irene Callahan walked through the front doors without hesitation. The echo of her footsteps filled the grand foyer, the marble cold beneath her shoes. There were no servants, no decorators, no polite voices trying to impress her this time. Just the still hum of air conditioning and memory. She paused beneath the chandelier, looking up at the cut crystal prisms that scattered light across the walls. It was beautiful, she supposed, but beauty built on arrogance always felt temporary. "Let's start where it went wrong," she said quietly. 2 contractors stood waiting near the staircase, both locals, both women in work boots and denim. They nodded. "The garage suite?" one asked. Irene's lips curved faintly. "Tear it out first." They didn't need more direction. The sound of crowbars and hammers soon filled the air, rhythmic, cleansing. The small, windowless guest room was the first to fall. The drywall cracked open easily, revealing wires and pipes where Irene had once sat, listening to laughter she wasn't invited to join. By noon, the room was gone. The space where they'd boxed her in was nothing but open air and light. She stood in the doorway, watching sunlight pour through the torn wall. It hit her face warm and steady. "That's better," she murmured. "Now it can breathe again." Weeks later, the transformation began. The marble floors were replaced with softer wood, easier on aging knees. The sleek kitchen turned into a communal space. Long tables, mismatched chairs, the kind that invited conversation instead of competition. The infinity pool was drained and filled with garden beds. When the work was done, Irene stood beside the new plaque at the gate. The Matriarch House. A shelter for women who've outlived welcome but not worth. Shiloh arrived first that morning, wearing her registry badge and carrying a folder of new resident forms. She looked around, wide-eyed. It doesn't even look like the same house. It isn't, Irene said. It finally earned its name. As they walked through the halls, a small group of women gathered near the lounge, retirees, widows, survivors of quiet neglect. Their laughter was soft, almost cautious, like birds learning to sing again. One woman brushed her hand along the wall. "It feels peaceful," she said. Irene nodded. "It's supposed to." By evening, local news vans arrived, a short human interest segment about a private donor restoring dignity to forgotten women. Irene declined interviews. The story wasn't about her anymore. She watched from the porch as volunteers unpacked boxes of bedding and groceries. The house glowed with warm lamplight, and for the first time since Martin's death, Irene felt something close to home. Rosa pulled up the drive, waving a rolled newspaper out the window. "Front page again?" she called. "And this time, they spelled your name right." Irene laughed softly. "They don't need to." Rosa grinned. "You really think they'll forget this?" "Maybe," Irene said, "but the women who sleep here tonight won't." A month later, the Matriarch House published its first community newsletter. Shiloh handled most of the writing. Updates on resident programs, volunteer drives, funding partnerships. When Irene opened the first copy, she froze at the third paragraph. This initiative was made possible through the guidance and generosity of our founder, Irene M. Callahan, and through the tireless work of Registry Officer Shiloh Moore, whose integrity helped preserve every document that made it possible. Shiloh hadn't told her. Irene smiled, eyes stinging in that quiet, stubborn way of older hearts. She folded the page carefully and slipped it between the deed records in her binder. Late one evening, as the house settled into its new rhythm, soft conversation in the halls, a pot of stew simmering in the kitchen, Irene stepped outside. The porch light glowed amber, the same shade as the sunset rolling over the hills. Down on the road below, a single car slowed at the edge of the property. It was black, expensive, familiar. Grayson's. He didn't get out. He just sat there with the engine idling, headlights cutting through the dusk. From the porch, Irene could just make out his face through the windshield. Pale, haunted, older than his years. He looked up at the house that had once been his monument and now belonged to everyone he'd never seen. Their eyes didn't meet. After a moment, he turned the wheel and the car rolled quietly back down the hill. Irene watched until the taillights disappeared. Then she looked at the plaque again, her reflection faintly etched across the words, "The Matriarch House." Inside, laughter rose from the kitchen. Soft, imperfect, real. She smiled just once. Now it's finally home. The sun came up soft over Bastrop, the kind of gold that didn't blind but blessed. The hills rolled out like an old quilt, stitched with cedar, stone, and the ghosts of fences long fallen. The Matriarch House stood quiet behind them, its windows glinting with morning light, alive but calm. Irene sat on the new porch swing, the chains creaking gently with every breeze. A teapot rested between her and Rosa on a small table fashioned from reclaimed wood. Shiloh, younger and restless in her calm, leaned against the railing, sipping from a chipped mug that read, "Land is Legacy." The three women said little. They didn't have to. The silence was the kind that carried understanding. Hard to believe this was once a mansion for one, Rosa said finally, glancing around. Now it's a home for 20, Irene replied, smiling. From the garden below came the sound of laughter, one of the residents teaching another how to prune tomato vines. It was a soft sound, human and whole. Shiloh tilted her head toward the horizon. He used to ride out there, didn't he? Your husband? Irene's eyes followed the line of the hills. Every morning, she said. Even when the land was dry, he'd saddle up and check the fences himself. Said a man who doesn't know his borders doesn't deserve them. Wise man, Rosa said. Stubborn man, Irene corrected, but her voice was tender. He used to say he could smell the rain before it hit the ridge. I didn't believe him back then. Do you now? Shiloh asked. Irene smiled faintly. Oh, I know it now. You live long enough, and the air tells you what's coming. A moment later, the crunch of tires broke the quiet. The mail carrier's truck came winding up the drive, a young man with a friendly wave. He hopped out, package in hand. Morning, ladies, he said. Something official for Mrs. Callahan. Rosa took it, squinting at the seal. City Hall? Irene raised a brow. I pay my taxes. Looks fancier than a bill, Rosa teased, handing it over. The envelope was heavy, the kind that carried certificates or invitations. Irene slid a finger under the flap, unfolded the contents, and scanned the letter. Her smile came slow and small. Well, isn't that something? Shiloh leaned forward. What is it? Irene passed her the paper. At the top, embossed in gold, were the words, City of Austin, Office of Civic Recognition. Shiloh read aloud. In gratitude for contributions to community housing and senior welfare, the city hereby honors Irene M. Callahan with the Award for Civic Service. She blinked. They're planning a ceremony next month. Rosa laughed full and loud. Well, look at that. You're officially respectable now. Irene poured herself more tea, unbothered. Funny, she said. I never applied. You going to go? Shiloh asked. Irene took a slow sip. No need. The work's already done. Still, Rosa said, grinning. Wouldn't hurt to take a little bow. Irene looked out across the hills, where the light shifted from gold to pale amber. Spotlights make people forget who helped them build the stage. I'd rather keep it quiet. Rosa studied her friend, the calm in her posture, the years in her eyes that no one had managed to take from her. You really found your peace, didn't you? Irene set her cup down gently. I didn't find it, she said. I made it. Peace doesn't visit. It moves in when you finally stop waiting for permission. The wind stirred the porch curtains. Somewhere inside, a clock chimed the hour. Shiloh smiled. Then here's to peace that stays. They clinked their mugs together, the sound soft as a promise. After a while, Rosa and Shiloh gathered their things, heading back inside to check on the kitchen. Irene stayed on the swing, alone with the land and the hum of life around her. She rocked slowly, watching the shadows stretch across the grass. The wind carried the faint scent of mesquite and lilac. The same air her husband once breathed. The same land her son had forgotten to love. When the breeze quieted, she rose, smoothing her cardigan. The swing creaked behind her as she walked to the front door. Solid oak, her own choice, and turned the brass handle. Inside, the house was warm, alive, full of the kind of noise that sounded like redemption. Irene looked around one last time, at the open windows, the laughter echoing from the kitchen, the sunlight spilling where walls had once shut her out. She smiled softly, locked the door behind her, and whispered to the quiet. He gave me the guest room, so I gave him the boot. The wind caught her words and carried them down the hill, across the open fields her husband once rode, until they disappeared into the horizon, leaving only the sound of peace.